Hello, everyone. It's time to start our program. So why don't you have a seat and attend to us up here. So today, this is a joint event with the Standing Together of the Bay Area. So for those who haven't been here before, welcome to the Unitarian Universal Society of San Francisco. We call it UUSF. Today's event is co-sponsored by the San Francisco Bay Area Friends of Standing Together. And I'm representing the UUSF Human Rights Working Group, which is very focused on Palestinian rights at this time. And my name is Ralph Fenn. And it's particularly relevant to today's presentation that we acknowledge the complexities of various groups using the same land. The land that we are now meeting on is the ancestral homeland of the Ramaytush Ohlone, the original inhabitants of the San Francisco Peninsula. The Ohlone never ceded this place, and we recognize that we benefit from living and working on their traditional homeland. We wish to pay our respects to the ancestors, elders, and relatives of the Ramaytush community. An important goal of this meeting is to promote coalition building between local organizations and similar goals regarding Palestine. Coalitions have bigger voices than individual organizations. You should have received a page of local Bay Area organizations that are active promoting Palestinian rights that you might want to work with in addition to Standing Together and here UUSF. Before we begin the presentation, let's take 3 minutes to speak to a person you don't yet know and get to know their organization, why they're here. Coalitions are important. So please stand up if you're sitting with people you do know. Well, they're going to take 3 minutes. It's critical, right? So I'll time it. I'll let you know when 3 minutes is done. So it's been 5 minutes, and I get the sense that this is really helpful, and people are finding it very captivating to talk to others. I just talked to a lady from Pakistan who's here, and it's just fascinating and mind opening. So today's event was conceived by Karen Jester Hecht of the San Francisco chapter of Friends of Standing Together. She contacted me and is looking for a place for Mr. Sayegh to speak. He's in the area now for a few days. And of course, at UUSF, we're delighted to provide a hall for today's important event. And Karen will now introduce Mr. Sayegh.
So first of all, thank you to everyone for coming to hear Halil and to be a part of these important conversations and his important work, the important work for all of us to do. I truly believe that if we all keep working together, building coalitions, speaking up and amplifying each other's voices, gives me support. We can support a true and lasting peace in Israel-Palestine. People like Halil, among other amazing peace activists, give me hope and keep me believing. I want to tell you a little bit about some local work. So I do some work independently, which is how I'm working to to bring Khalil today. And I also do some work with Friends of Standing Together, which is one of hundreds of groups worldwide that work to support Standing Together. Standing Together is a grassroots group of Israelis and Palestinians who work to build a new majority within Israeli society to support peace, equality, and justice. Standing Together has been an active leader against the atrocities in Gaza, the West Bank, and they advocate for the return of all hostages. They have been instrumental in getting aid into Gaza through their humanitarian guard and other initiatives. Locally, we do our work by hosting speakers, by co-sponsoring events, including film screenings. Last month, for example, we brought No Other Land and or co-sponsored No Other Land and There Is Another Way. We also have a bi-monthly peace vigil in Berkeley, etc. And if you're interested, you can talk to me, or we have some flyers back there that have the QR code, so you can get involved. I also want to mention that Yael, sitting here in the front row, is a co-founder, a founder of SFB for Peace, which is another very important peace group working in the Bay Area and beyond. And so you can talk to Yael. Oh, another thing I wanted to mention is on May 3rd, which is next Saturday, we are having a peace rally in Oakland. There are some brochures back there. We hope that you will all come. We hope that you will tell everyone you know to please come. It is in conjunction with the peace rally that's happening in Israel, Palestine, that I think will happen a few days later. It's going to be huge there. We hope it's going to be huge here and huge worldwide as we all come out and stand up and, stand up for peace. Okay, Khalil. Khalil is the founder and executive director of Agora Initiative, which is a DC-based nonprofit that advocates about the need for peace in Israel and Palestine and to end the Israeli occupation and to educate the public about the issues. Halil is also a political analyst focused on the Israeli-Palestinian conflict and on Palestinian politics. Before moving to DC, Halil lived most of his life in Gaza City and Ramallah, where he worked for several international groups promoting freedom of religion and human rights, and he was involved in a lot of political activism, humanitarian work, and work with religious institutions. His writing is featured in several outlets, including AI Monitor, The New Arab, The Economist, New York Times, and Wall Street Journal. He appears regularly on TV to offer analyses, including on the BBC, ABC Australia, CNN, and Al Jazeera. And possibly I left something out, I don't know. He holds a master's in political science from American University and a bachelor's degree in biblical studies from Bethlehem Bible College. Khalil has lots to say, but he's also open to answering any questions that you have. So there are index cards, and Ralph, I think, is going to collect them and then read from them. And I don't think I'm over speaking to say he's open to any question. So whatever you want to ask, he's here to respond and do the best he can. One last thing I want to add, in order for Khalil to be able to continue his work, I'm asking that if you can donate any amount, please do so, either on his QR code, which you can find on the brochure that Ralph kindly put together of all the organizations, or cash, you can stuff it in his pockets. Okay, I'm kidding. Or write him a check. Also, today, I just learned that an anonymous donor is going to match the donations up to $1,000. So if you can possibly do that, yeah, today, that would be great. Talk to me or Ralph, or we'll hook it up.
So good to be here. Thank you, Karen. Thank you for all the co-sponsoring organization for having me. It's an honor to be here. It is unfortunate that I have to be here during still the ongoing genocide going on in Gaza. I have to speak up. Is that good enough? Okay. So I was saying it's unfortunate that I have to speak during a time in which the genocide in Gaza is still going on. And the title of my talk, Gaza and the future. What's the future after this devastation? How do we get out of it? All these questions that I'm really looking forward to answer Not that I have definite answers, but it's sort of an exercise to think together and to question what's going on or what's after. But the way I structure my talk is to look sort of from where we are right now all the way back forward to the history of how we got here, because one would not understand the situation in which we are in, and even the genocide in Gaza, without the historical context in which it happened. And you know, since the beginning of all of this recent round of violence on October 7th, 2023, we've heard all the phrase that it all started on October 7th, right? This is what the media always tells us. And on the other side, we hear all the responses from Palestinians like myself who say, no, it actually did not start on October 7th, nor October 6th, nor October 5th. It actually started a decade before that, before that. And it started with the post-World War II order that started in the Middle East, right? It's the migration of European Jews who came to what used to be known as historical Palestine, and then what came out of that, of the 1947 beginning of the ethnic cleansing campaign against the Palestinians like myself, who had their parents or grandparents had to be forced out of their homes. Gaza, as we know it today, was literally formed during 1948. So there was nothing such a thing as Gaza Strip before 1948. If you look at the map today, you see Gaza and has this weird shape, right? And it's about 22 miles in length and 12 in get back a little bit. Yeah, exactly. Thank you. And that shape was created in 1948. And that shape was literally the border of what became almost like the prison, a giant refugee camp that Gaza has become. 77% of the population of Gaza today are the descendant of the refugees that were ethnic cleansed in 1948, and including them myself. So I was born to a family whose grandparents have experienced Nakba in 1948. Nakba, for those of you who don't know, is the word for catastrophe in Arabic, which commemorates the destruction of the Palestinian society in 1948. It commemorates the destruction of more than 500 villages that were completely wiped off of the map. It commemorates the destruction of towns like my own town, Mashdal, which is located in the southern part of historical Palestine, today upon which the new Israeli city of Ashkelon is established. So all of that was part of the context of what happened on October 7th and the context of this genocide. To go fast forward in that, after 48, you know, the sort of prison in Gaza was created, or the small chunk of land that doesn't have really any way to look out of Gaza. People start fighting back. The Palestinians wanted to go back to their land, right? They would see, literally, if you stand on Gaza, from Beit Lahia, for example, you could look and you could literally see your own old town, like Mashdal. My grandparents used to see it, but you're not allowed to get in. If you try to get in, you'll get killed. This is in the 50s. Since the 50s, Israel had the policy that if you try to go back to your land, you'll get killed. And this is the grievances that people have inherited all the way until October 7th, until today. But today, the reality is such extreme that we are witnessing this genocide that's happening in Gaza. The situation is clearly devastated. We all know over 80% of the houses in Gaza are completely destroyed. The water and electricity infrastructure is completely destroyed. There are no gas in Gaza. Hospitals, barely functioning hospitals that are, when you hear hospitals in Gaza, you really think of functioning hospitals like in the US. The truth is, most of the hospitals, so-called hospitals in Gaza, are actually clinics. They're not actual hospitals with ICU and all these rooms. There are just small clinics that function as hospitals because that's the best they can have today. The starvation in Gaza is increasing, and I think we are afraid of a famine in the next few weeks because Israel hasn't allowed for the last 2 months since the end of the ceasefire any relief, food or water, or any form of help to get into Gaza. People are living in tents. Diseases are spreading due to the bacteria and the lack of proper tools to treat all these issues. So that's the situation in Gaza today. That's the situation on the humanitarian level. On the political level, there seemed to be no way out, right? The entire formula that there will be a ceasefire based on a negotiated ceasefire based on the frame that Israeli hostages who are still held in Gaza would be free in return of a permanent ceasefire has been completely rejected by Netanyahu. So Netanyahu doesn't want to see a ceasefire. He wants to prolong this conflict, and he wants to really prolong it even at the expense of the hostages' lives. On the other hand, we have Hamas, who's the party that ruling Gaza, wants a permanent ceasefire in exchange of the hostages, something that is rejected even by the US, not only by Israel, because they would like to see Hamas dismantled. But what is more dangerous than that is that the question, it's not about Hamas being dismantled or not. The question is about what's Israel's vision for the future of Gaza. And Israel is very clear what their vision is, whether Hamas is dismantled or not. It's ethnic cleansing, especially after Mr. Trump has came with this creative idea, quote unquote, creative. It is creative, you have to say, but it's awful, which is that the Trump Rivera in the Middle East, right? And his whole thing is like, we're going to move them. And for the Israelis, that was like music to their ears, especially the Israeli government, because, you know, the idea of the ethnic cleansing and displacing the Palestinian is not a new idea in the Zionist narrative or the Zionist conscious, because since 1948 and before that, most of the Zionist thinkers have concluded that there would not be a state of Israel without the ethnic cleansing of the Palestinians. That's why it happened in 1948. Today, Israel deals with what they call the demographical question of Palestine. They've always had this struggle that the demography tend to be more in favor of the Palestinians, and if it's not, at least it's increasing in there. And there was always these plans or these options of what's called voluntarily transfer, meaning you just have to transfer them there voluntarily. But what is voluntarily about destroying the entire city and destroying the entire infrastructures of hospitals, schools, etc., so that people would want to leave? So that's the plan. That's not what the Israelis are telling us right now. Let Hamas lay down its weapons, which I actually support. I think Hamas should lay down its weapons to avoid the war. But what's the alternative? They tell us, oh, we're going to ethnic cleanse you no matter what, even after Hamas lays down its weapons. However, realistically speaking, so far Israel has failed in its attempt to empty Gaza of its residents. And it didn't fail because they did not use enough brutality or they did not use enough war crimes. They committed all sorts of war crimes that you can imagine. I myself, for those who don't know, have lost my father and my sisters who were killed in this war, as much as countless friends who I lost during this war. So no, Israel used all sorts of really awful techniques when it comes to trying to ethnic cleanse the Gaza Strip, but they failed because of the Egyptian rejection for it. There is only one border beside Israel with Gaza, and it's the Egyptian border. And the Egyptians has been very clear that they wouldn't open the border, and also because of the resilience of the Palestinian people. So that leave us to the question: how do we get out of there? Israel want to ethnic cleanse us. It's not happening. It wouldn't work. I mean, from an Israeli point of view, obviously, it's the ideal outcome, and it's a brutal outcome that wouldn't work due to the Egyptian rejection. And on the other hand, we are resilient on our homeland, and we don't want to get out of there. So what's the way out? My view is that what we need, obviously, is a ceasefire. And everyone these days is talking about ceasefire, right? The whole slogan is ceasefire now, etc. Now, my view is that we need something more than a ceasefire this time. You know how many times Gaza had ceasefires in the last 10 years? Anyone knows? More than 10 times. Why did we have more than 10 ceasefires in the last 10 years? Because we had 10 wars, almost, or small escalations at least. Between the small escalations and about like other 5 major wars, we've needed a ceasefire over a ceasefire over a ceasefire. So what's the problem with ceasefire as far as I'm concerned? That it is a ceasefire. It's not ultimate peace. It's permanent. It's not permanent. So when the phrase even permanent ceasefire comes, I often look at myself and I say, no such a thing as permanent ceasefire. There's such a thing as permanent what? Peace. So what we need is a permanent peace, and permanent peace can come under one condition, which is to end the Israeli occupation, or at least to open a way for the Israeli occupation to end, a negotiation, some form of negotiation. As we all know, that the problem of Gaza is not a problem of Gaza in itself, as much as, you know, the media try to portray it today as the Gazan question. The truth is, Gaza question is the Palestine question. Because of the refugee problem that I described now. and P, because it's part of what's on the Palestinian territories. So what's going on in the West Bank in terms of the incremental ethnic cleansing of people, especially from Area C, the destruction of homes, the violations of Al-Aqsa Mosque, etc., it all is contributing to what's going on in Gaza. And thus, to address the Gaza question, I believe we need to address the Palestine question as a whole. So what we need in Gaza is a ceasefire based on the promise that Hamas will be dismantled and disarmed in return for a clear path for a solution. Could be two states. If Israel is not interested in two states, which is what international law actually demands, maybe they want one state, where we welcome that too. Maybe they want us all to get votes in the Israeli election, but they also don't want that. So that's the only way to move forward. We need to see a ceasefire that would lead to some form of a political solution. I think that's all for opening remarks, and then I welcome questions and we can discuss in details. I'm sorry I didn't go in depth. I wasn't as
Well, thank you. That was very
but
well
I always believe that the questions are more important because it gets to what you actually need, as opposed to like me not knowing the level of knowledge or the level of interest in whatever part of the issue.
So Karen, do you want to collect cards or to read the questions?
Thank you so much for what you've said. I think a lot of us always wonder about, and I've always wondered about, the root causes of things. And so I just wonder, you haven't mentioned the word apartheid, under which the Palestinians had to live for so many years, or any details about it. And I think that should be emphasized a little bit. Maybe if you'd like to talk about that, because I think that is the root cause of a lot of these problems.
Yeah, to start with, the root cause is not the apartheid. Apartheid is a recent phenomenon that Israel has imposed. The root cause is the colonial Israeli occupation and expansionism, which I mentioned. It's as the root cause. What is apartheid? Apartheid is the rule of a minority with a system of segregation, which is what Israel has implemented between the river and the sea. The fact that there are no two states today, it has resulted in an apartheid regime that Israel is imposing. But as far as I'm concerned, the problem with Israel is not apartheid. Israel is way worse than apartheid today. The system that Israel is implementing is way more brutal. And I'll give you two examples for how it differs than South African apartheid, for example. South Africa used to have the Africans as part of the workforce. They could actually work. They needed them for work because the white people are only 7%. In Israel, that's not the case. Israel is isolating the Palestinians from economy too. The second thing, in South African apartheid, they had an airport. They had the freedom of movement. They could travel if they want and come back. There was no plan to get rid of them. In the Palestinian situation of settler colonialism, it's a bit worse than apartheid because they want to get rid of you. The demographical question is an issue in Israel because they are fascinated with this idea that they want to be a Jewish and democratic state. In South Africa, they didn't care, and thus they didn't have to get rid of the people. So apartheid, I'm careful with how to use it because it is true. It is apartheid. But what's more true that it's way worse than apartheid, in my opinion. But the apartheid can be manifested clearly when you see a Palestinian doesn't have any right in the West Bank as opposed to a Jewish settler who just came there and he has all the rights. And also the apartheid in Gaza was manifested before 2005, when literally 5,000 Israeli settlers who lived in Gaza controlled the life of 1 million Palestinians. Can you imagine that? When I lived in Gaza before 2005, the 5,000 settlers, Jewish settlers, controlled our water, our electricity, our freedom of movement, because if something small happened to one of these settlers, they'll shut down the entire area, and Palestinians will have no freedom of movement. But yeah, thank you for your question. It's an important one.
I'm going to think like a farmer for a minute and try to get really down to the roots of the problem.
Yeah.
Right under the surface of the ground is the fact that the UN in 1948, only 33 countries voted to make it Israel a state, 22 declined, and I think 14 abstained. Now 124 countries are for Palestine to be a state. So if the solution, if a vote on it led to such catastrophic effects, and Israel showed their true colors and intentions through this whole 77 years, it would be, I mean, in a just world, the UN would go back in and re-vote, and they would vote for a two-state solution or a one-state solution. But digging down even farther to the roots is the question I have for you. Can you please explain the conditions? And this is because you went to Bethlehem Theological Seminary School, the conditions of Genesis 12, 1 through 4.
Okay, which is bless those who
Abraham's blessings.
well, the blessings. Okay, just to make sure I got the verse right. Yeah.
So that you will be a blessing.
Yeah, that's an important question. Okay, yeah. So to start with, unlike the UN returning to revise the recognition of Israel, it's actually interesting because the exact law that was passed in the UN to recognize the state of Israel, it recognizes two states, an Arab state for the Arabs and a Jewish state for the Jews, right? And thus, many legal scholars are arguing that Israel did not fulfill the condition of its being recognized as a state because they didn't allow an Arab state to be recognized. I'm not a legal scholar, so I don't go to all these legal debates, but I'm by training, I studied political science. So I think in the real politique world, not in the legal frameworks, which is important, but many times it's not applicable. So from a practical point of view, there are two solutions, as we said, one state or two states, no matter what. Now, I could tell you that for me as a liberal Palestinian who is patriot, but not really strong nationalist, I don't mind a one-state solution. One-state solution would be good, ideal. We'll have a new identity that has to emerge and be established for Palestinians and Israelis. But realistically today, this is unlikely to happen. We have one state today, and it's the state of Israel. But it is, as we described, an apartheid situation, a bit worse than apartheid. And the only way out is through two-state solution at this point. Why? A, the Jews would never, Israeli Jews would never accept equality with Palestinians because it means the dissolving of Israel. Israel would cease to be a Jewish state. And the second thing is the Palestinians, a lot of them, the political parties and their allies in the Arab world, etc., still emphasize a two-state solution because they want a Palestinian state. Hamas believes in two states according to their charter, although they sometimes move to say we want the whole thing. Fatah believes in two states, the PLO official position, so are the Arab countries. So what we have to do, and it's much quicker to fix the issue at this point and stop the genocide by just separation than trying to work years and years to build a new identity for the one-state solution. Because ultimately, you want to just stop the killing more than anything else. But with time, as time goes on and on more, two-state solution is becoming more and more dead. But here's what terrifies me, that with the death of two-state solution, what emerges is not a one-state solution. What emerges is the eradication of the Palestinians that we are witnessing today. And I'm afraid that as we wait for one-state solution, there'll be no more Palestinians. That's why I want the immediate two states to stop. And then maybe we can think of federation or one state or whatever, but we don't have the luxury right now to think of that. We just want to stop the killing in the most practical way to move to a better state. Now, on Genesis 12, 1 to 4, obviously, this is a verse used by by American Christians to justify the state of Israel and its crimes, as God blessed Abraham, and thus they read the blessing as it's about Israel. That's in the study of theology or biblical studies, we'll call their interpretation eisegesis, right? There's two ways of understanding scripture. One is eisegesis and one is exegesis. Exegesis is when you dig in the text to understand it as it is. Eisegesis, you throw your own meaning in there. That's a clear model of eisegesis, what Christian Zionists are doing. This text is about Abraham. It was fulfilled with Abraham. Christians tend to believe it was fulfilled with Christ as well. I don't think it's related to anything going on today. And if you want to take it as if it's related, if that is the claim, then also Leviticus is applicable as well, which says, if you disobey me, I will throw you away from the land. And this is not happening today. Thus, I don't think that taking the scripture and apply it to today's politics is the most helpful exercise. Other questions?
Yeah, thank you so much for being here. I really appreciate your presence and standing together and all this. I don't know, my reading of the history, the Balfour Declaration came about in 1917 as the British were looking forward to taking power, to becoming the dominant power in the Middle East. They were going head to head with the Ottoman Empire, which was part of World War I. They were aligned with Germany and Austria-Hungary and so on. But it was a struggle between different imperialist powers and who was going to come out on top. And Balfour made that declaration recognizing that the Zionism was an ally of European colonialism. And it seems to me that since that time, the imperialist powers, the United States and especially the Europeans, have seen Israel as a key ally in their domination of the Middle East. And they're the ones that are putting their thumbs on the scale, that if it was just for the Palestinian people and the Jewish Israeli people, there could be a solution, but not with the combined power of the imperialists constantly supporting the more right-wing elements in Israel and giving them the arms and encouraging them to carry out this. So I wonder if you
that's a great question. To start with the British part and imperialism, this is indisputable. This is facts, right? That's history. So yes, I agree 100%. Now, on the question of imperialism and its impact, yes, neo-imperialism, especially the American neo-imperialism, is influencing all of that. But I'm a bit careful, how do I phrase it when it comes to America, or the United States, not America, the United States of America, how it connects to that, because the truth is, empirically speaking, Israel has no value for even American imperial interest. Israel is insignificant in terms of even power compared to, like, Qatar is way more important for the US imperialism than Israel. Yet Israel gets all unconditional support that Qatar doesn't, despite that Qatar pays for American Air Force to be there. They have the biggest Air Force there. I'll give you another example. During the Ukraine war, the US tried to ship some of the US weapons that are in Israel to Ukraine. Israel said no. So what sort of an alliance is that, where it's like a spoiled child who wants to get all things from you and then gives you nothing? So I would argue Israel is worse than that, in the sense that it's not an actual, beneficial even alliance for US imperialism. So the question becomes, why is the US still supporting this country that is committing all these crimes? It's, to an extent today, I would argue, is a rogue state, and it's not significant for its interest. And I think I have two explanations. The first is this whole, cultural connection that was born out of Christian Zionism, dispensationalism, etc., that dominated American culture to an extent. Now it's collapsing gradually, and that's a positive thing. And the second thing is because our American Jewish brothers and sisters and their affinity to the state of Israel, and their sense that this is a cause they would want to lobby for as much as they can. These are the two reasons. Practically speaking, if you want to take it empirically, even for the interest of the empire, Israel is not that important, because they have all these bases in the region. Jordan, for example, the US can use Jordan airspace anytime they want. In Israel, they need a permission, but they can fly their Air Force in Jordan anytime. So is in Qatar, Bahrain, UAE, but not in Israel. So I would argue US imperialism even itself doesn't need Israel. Israel needs the US imperialism and not versa. But yes, imperialism, Britain and France especially played a huge part at the establishment of the state of Israel. That's indisputable, and I agree with that. Maybe questions on the papers or whatever you want, Raf.
So
Sure. Yeah. So he asked me if I can tell more about the Agora Initiative. So my organization, which is a 503c nonprofit that we founded 2 years ago in Washington. And the idea is to educate the public about Israel and Palestine, the need to end the Israeli occupation and to establish peace between Palestinians and Israelis. So most of what we do is education, trying to shape the narrative, change it, because we see that extremism has taken over the US in both sides, actually, where we're not thinking rationally about how do we get out of there. We're trying to provide a rational approach to the whole thing. Beside education, I spend a lot of my time as a political analyst writing and publishing, and that's part of Agora's mission. The hope is as we grow more, we'll hire more researchers, etc., so we can influence US policy in DC in a way that center Palestinians and Israelis' voices who are anti-apartheid and anti-occupation. That's what we want to see. The truth is, if you look in DC and you look at all think tanks or think and do tanks, which is what we aspire to be, they're all pro-war to an extent. And if they're not pro-war, you cannot survive. You have to be silent most of the time. So we're trying to be a lighthouse in Washington where we're providing a different analysis and different approach that centers Palestinians and Israeli voices who oppose the war. So that's what we are about. And thank you for asking, Mohammed. So there are a few questions there, Raf, I see. Oh, Nancy, yeah, you can ask.
Yeah, I think it's helpful. It's helpful if it's mostly a question and less a comment.
So in your introduction, were you an activist in Palestine, Israel?
I was, yeah.
So I'm curious about what sort of activities you can engage in, or you did engage in, I don't know what years it was, as an activist in Palestine and Israel. If you can comment on what activists are doing now in Israel as well. We're hearing a little bit more.
Sure. Yeah, sure. So I did two things. I mean, most of my activism was local, like in Palestinian politics, without involvement of the Israeli-Palestinian conflict questions. So I was always, on liberal, secular sort of circles in Palestine. So I always, opposed the ruling parties both in Gaza and in the West Bank. I always was involved with anti-authoritarian movements, and the idea that we need a democracy in Palestine has been always something that occupied in my mind. That's on the one hand. On the other hand, I worked a lot with Israelis. So we tried to bring Israelis and Palestinians together to talk, to have some form of dialogue so we can come with a common vision for both people. And I spent 7 years doing that. I brought Israeli speakers to inside Palestine to speak. I went there, I spoke, etc. Now, I'm trying to think carefully how to state that, but I would say that if I would evaluate my 7 years of work, I would evaluate them as a failure, a huge failure. And the reason why they're failure is you've seen what happened right now, what's happening and what's happened in October 7th. We failed. The peace movement has failed. We have to acknowledge it. You cannot continue repeating the same methodology and assume a different results. Otherwise, you're fooled. So we have to acknowledge that we failed as the pro-peace movement. And why we failed? Because we really did misunderstood the structural issue of the problem. The question is not a question of dialogue or a misunderstanding. It's a question of a legal structural problem that Israel is imposing on the Palestinians. And unless this structural problem is solved, which is a political solution, we'll always have dialogue, enter to the room, and then you leave and you live under an apartheid and he live under a democracy. So that's need to be tackled. Today, there are great activists who are doing different work. In Gaza today, we witnessed in Beit Lahia in the north a huge protest against Hamas and against Israel, both, which is really inspiring to me, the fact that people who are being genocided are standing and saying, enough with the war, free the hostages, we want to see a peaceful solution. This is amazing to watch. So activism in Palestine are doing that. I know in the Israeli side, there is a growing movement of anti-genocide protesters in Tel Aviv. I think standing together is taking part of that as far as I'm concerned, which is positive. I personally think it took them so long to get there, but I'm glad that they're there and saying it very clearly that we need a ceasefire, we need an end to the genocide. So that's the type of activism is happening. So to me, as an activist, I no longer believe in dialogue. I just believe in coexisting together. Either we coexist the occupation together, or it's meaningless that we would meet because we are unequal. Once we're equal under the law, we can have dialogue, but we're not there yet.
For a permanent peace or a political solution to take place, do you think that is realistic with Netanyahu in power?
That's $1 million question. No, not with Netanyahu, except if it's forced on him. I think, like, listen, in an ideal world where the US really imposes something in Netanyahu, it could happen, but the US doesn't want that. And they're not there, right? They're not ready. Trump is not going to enforce anything on that regard. He's isolationist, doesn't care. Netanyahu doesn't want it. But what's more dangerous is not Netanyahu himself, is the Netanyahu effect on the Israeli society. I mean, I always tell people that, like, Israel had Netanyahu for how many years? Like 10 years for now? More, actually. 18 almost, right? Yeah, it like back and forth, but yeah, almost 18 years. Actually less than that, but I don't know, whatever. 15 years, let's say, assume in the middle. And Netanyahu made Israel in his image right now. The mainstream Israeli society is an image of Netanyahu, and Netanyahu is an image of Israeli society. What do I mean by that? A, complete rejection for Palestinian rights and a solution. And P, the idea that you can live by hasbara. Hasbara is the word for propaganda, or to explain in Hebrew. And Netanyahu was the first to bring hasbara from only as an explanation and propaganda to abroad to explain the Israel position to something the Israeli society live by, where you don't have to question the morality of what's going on. I'll give you an example. When October 7th happened, and obviously it's horrific what happened and terrifying, from an Israeli point of view, October 7th was just, it happened just because the Palestinians are animals. They're primitive. There is no explanation whatsoever that the Palestinians could be angry or have any right to violence. That's sort of the PP approach. That's how he thinks. That's how he approaches the world. In 1953, there was an attack on the same kibbutzim in the south of Israel by fighters from Gaza. And Moshe Dayan, who was, I believe back then, the Minister of Defense, came down there. And he's obviously not someone who likes Palestinians. He's very hawkish. He was part of the ethnic cleansing campaigns. He looks and he gave this famous statement as he's standing in Nahal Oz, the kibbutz that was attacked. And he said, "Why are you looking and you're surprised? Aren't these people the people we kicked out from their homes? And they're looking at us and seeing our land flourishing while they are not there and they cannot come back to their towns." Why I'm bringing this example? To tell you where Israeli society is becoming right now. It's really so radical that they cannot see even the cause and the grievances of the Palestinians, as opposed to even the founding fathers who've committed the atrocities in 1948, but they still have had this like slightly element of humanity, despite that they're hawkish, to see that the others are human, that they have real grievances and struggles and emotions. And that is, to an extent, the PP effect, I call it, because obviously it's not only about PP, about the entire revisionist Zionism movement and how they approach the world.
Some 4 questions, people who have been waiting patiently on the chat channel. First one is, isn't moving Gazans back to Gaza just a continuation of ethnic cleansing? Is it a toxic zone now? And if so, then where should the Gazans safely live during the next decade of rebuilding?
I think there is ways to do it. The Arab nations have already proposed a way to do it while Gazans are in Gaza, to rebuild by starting from Rafah, moving everyone there, and then you go up. But I have another solution. We can. It's not a problem. Israel should give them freedom of movement to the West Bank. That's part, according to international law, part of the territories. We have the road. It's already there from Hebron to Gaza. It will take 2 weeks. We'll fix it, and then they can travel freely. If they want to leave for a couple of years and come back, they can go to the West Bank. The problem is Israel. They don't want to open that, even the West Bank. So they create a problem, and then they tell the entire world that this is your problem, you have to solve, and they refuse to even not solve it themselves. just allow it to be solved by someone else, which is the Palestinian Authority and the others in the West Bank. Israel rejects that, as it have rejected always any other solution for these issues.
From chat, Israel serves military industry in the United States. Palestine is used to test weapons and surveillance. So it's a comment, and AI. How to resist this?
That's correct. I think how to resist it, I mean, your personal choice, boycott this military industrial stuff. I mean, you're in San Francisco, so this is where a lot of the capitalist investors in these companies are. You have to boycott. I mean, if you buy stocks, always look at what stocks you buy and make sure they're not part of the military industrial complex. That's the only way I can think of myself in the personal level, because this problem is such structural issue that it takes a lot of work to tackle. But in the individual level, we can boycott. We can look at the stocks we're buying, make sure we're not buying stocks that goes, especially not only, I mean, yes, the military industrial complex, but the second thing is also, as you mentioned, the AI things, the AI models that were used in Israel to kill Palestinians indiscriminately were designed here in Silicon Valley, not far from here. So make sure when you buy stocks or when you invest or when you whatever, make a moral decision to abstain from bad companies that are contributing to the genocide.
Third question, do you have any thoughts on how to get through the media bias and blackout on all things Palestine in the US?
I wish I do. I think the social media has already democratized the space, and we are already a big part of why a lot of people, both on the right and on the left, by the way, according to the surveys, are opening their eyes to become more critical of Israel. It's because of social media. Because until today, mainstream media, despite the massive change in the public opinion, still emphasize or not emphasize, still are quite much biased toward the Palestinians. So I'm often, like, you know, on CNN, for example, and they always tell me, they make sure to throw the "it started in October 7th" thing, always. And you know, I take it nicely, because I know it's his job, and someone told him he has to say it, and I always have to be nice and say October 7th is horrible, but it started, like, you know, 75 years ago, whatever. So we can tackle it slowly, one by one, but I think social media is already amazing. We have a huge amount of podcasts and things that are, you know, free and downloadable, that where you can get your own information. I myself am working on a podcast actually called "This Is Not a Dialogue," where me and a Jewish friend of mine talk about what does it mean to not have a dialogue yet to talk and coexist together. So there's all sort of podcasts and things out there you can listen to.
Fourth question, is it a conspiracy theory or truth to say Hamas and October 7th were orchestrated by Netanyahu in order to justify the elimination of the Palestinians?
I think it is a conspiracy theory. There is no evidence to support that he planned that, but there is evidence to support that he empowered Hamas in Gaza and allowed it to be there for so long. So I don't think there is a direct linear line between October 7th and Netanyahu, but I think there is a causation between October 7th and Netanyahu. He empowered Hamas so much, fed them with weapons, fed them with money, which ended up making weapons, made sure to empower them in Palestine at the expense of Palestinian nationalists and secularists and leftists. And this exploded in his face on October 7th, and he saw it as an opportunity. I mean, this is a government in Israel that is the most extreme and fascist, right? In 2018, there was this paper published by the Minister of Finance in Israel, Smotrich, which is called the Decisive Plan. And it literally says that we want to see some form of resistance or intifada on the Palestinian end in order to ethnic cleanse them. That's what makes me, thinks like that the Hamas folks are not the smartest when they did it, because they didn't really read the Israeli society. Like, this is a government that says, I want war to ethnic cleanse you, and you offer them the war they want. I think that was beside the moral problem with it, which I think was immoral and they committed war crimes. it is strategically ill and not thought of well.
People who have cards that they've been patiently holding on to that,
No.
before we do impromptu ones. So how about, let's see, Linda. Okay. And
thank you so much. Thank you for this extraordinary explanation. When I think of October 7th, I think way back to 48 almost immediately. And I also feel that this was this prison, they say the largest open air prison in the world. And they found 40 places, Hamas found 40 places to pierce and get out. And I thought, it's just like escaping from prison. And I look at Hamas as the armed part of Palestine and their legal leaders, their government. So, I mean, it's more complicated than it seems when you just say, oh, I hate Hamas. I really don't.
Yeah.
Yes, I have a question. Where are you from? Because I'm thinking when you were saying if you can, if there were say you were to release the prisoners as well as the hostages, we want to use two terms, where would they go? Where would Gazans go to go home? And that would be where you came from, presumably. And I was interested when you say, oh, Gaza can go to the West Bank or Lebanon or whatever. What about just going home? So that was my question.
Yeah, so the West Bank is part of home. Palestine cannot be divided, right? It's part of the same territory. When I say the West Bank, I am using a very conservative framework, which is the international law, right? So I'm being very specific, but also the international law has the right of return, etc. So I'm not denying the right of return here. I'm just being practical about it. Now, I could give you a whole sermon about right of return. We should return tomorrow, etc. But it's not happening soon. I'm being pragmatic that the one place Palestinians could leave to is within Palestine because that's their right to refugee, right? But yes, people like myself came originally from Mashdal within Israel today. Now, on Hamas and them being legitimate government, no, they're not. They won an election in 2006 and it expired in 4 years. So they're not a legitimate leader in any stretch of imagination. That's one. And then P, yes, international law gives you right to fight, to resist the occupation. No one would dispute that, but does not give you right to go and kill civilians, neither side. And that's, we should be against no matter who does it. I think that if any Palestinian group fought in a way that only fought soldiers, I wouldn't have moral questions with it, but I would still have the strategic question. Is it strategically good or not? Sometimes the bravest thing to do is to stay silent or to not fight. Not to stay silent, sorry, not to fight. Not to be silent, sorry. It's to be quiet and not to fight back militarily. Because if you would be defeated, it's the worst thing that could happen to you. So Palestinians would have been better off if we continued fighting non-violently, because the human toll is insane in Gaza. 50,000 people are dead, tens of thousands under the rubble. The city is completely destroyed. So what Palestinians would be busy in for the next 10 or 20 years, reconstruction of Gaza. And thus we wouldn't have enough energy to fight against Israel legally or even like to talk about a state or decolonization, etc. That's best case scenario. Now, worst case scenario is they succeed in the ethnic cleansing and then they'll build us a museum just like the indigenous American people. And that's a disaster too, because we don't want to become another indigenous people to whom they would just build a museum. So, yes.
A question. Can you think of a historic situation which is similar to the relationship between Israel and Gaza, and maybe that would inform a possible solution? I think about Native Americans in the U.S.
Yeah,
so on.
No, I can think of many settler colonial states and settler colonial experiences. Australia, Canada, the U.S., obviously, South Africa, right, and others. But the problem is, I think all these examples are limited because of one differences between all the settler colonialism and Zionism. That is that Zionism, and it's very hard, is an ethno-nationalist project as much as it's settler colonial, meaning to me, and this is very controversial to say, this is like sort of my hot take, settler colonialism to an extent is not the biggest problem we're facing as much as ethno-nationalism when it comes to this question. Why? Because settler colonialism, like in the US, to an extent, it will progress enough to like accept the people. Like today, it's still, America is still settler colonial, right? It is a settler colonial state, but I can have equal rights to any white person here, at least legally, constitutionally. In Israel, it's impossible for this to happen. And it's impossible because of the ethno-nationalist feature of the state itself. And I think that's why I cannot just compare Israel to another examples. I just cannot compare it to South Africa or to America or to other. It's a unique case that has to be tackled with its uniqueness in many ways, yet all other features of settler colonialism are there and similar. And I'm afraid that, you know, the Palestinians will end up like the indigenous people here, obviously. But I think that so far we've succeeded so much to stay resilient and to have thwarted all the plans for us to become as such. But seeing the genocide and seeing the fact that the word stayed silent in that century, in 2023 to 2025, makes me pessimistic that perhaps the arc of history doesn't always move toward progress and more rights. It could regress pretty much to an ugly place.
Does anyone have a question? Not so much comments. Yeah, question?
It's kind of an epiphany. And as an analyst, I want to ask you this question, but I still need to give you a preface for it. And that being that in this country, we have groups like Jewish Voice for Peace, and not in our name, that are so much against the Zionist project, does not represent Judaism and the fact that multiple religious groups live together in the United States peacefully. So they know this. The biggest, now there's like 7 million Jews in the country. There's tens, if not hundreds of millions of Christian nationalists, a Zionist. The Zionist philosophy of the Christians is built on this verse. And let me read it to you, and then I would like your response. Okay. Now the Lord said to Abraham, go from your country and your kindred and your father's house to the land that I will show you, and I will make you a great nation. I will bless you and make your name great so that you will be a blessing. Everybody forgets that so that you will be a blessing is a conditional. The blessing was given so that you can be. Is Israel a blessing to Palestine?
Obviously, no. No, it's not. It's obvious. I think there's one question here, Raf, and that's Raf is not paying attention. There's one question here. She's been.
Two questions from the chat feed. Why don't we blame Israel for the destruction? And U.S. and international bodies for failing to prevent a genocide? Question mark. It seems short-sighted to blame it on the Palestinians for not predicting a genocide will unfold. That's there's a question in there.
Yeah. So no, the answer is seems like the person who wrote it either doesn't hear or doesn't want to hear. I mean, and it's not my fault. It's very clear that the full responsibility of the genocide is on Israel. Period. Right. When we talk strategically, I mean, it's our right as Palestinians to think and to critique any party, and I tend to criticize Hamas, not the Palestinians, for being, making strategic mistakes, and that's okay. And if anyone is bothered by that, they be my guests. I'm fine with that.
Hi.
We're finishing up our chat.
There's a follow-up on that question, which is there was the Great March of Return, a couple of years before October 7th. That was peaceful, and they were gunned down.
Yes, of course. They were gunned down, they're killed. They were you know, tens, if not hundreds of people who were injured, lost a limb or a leg. But guess what? There was no genocide, right? I don't care what your opinion or whatever. My mother, my father, my sister were killed in this war. Countless of my friends. If your opinion that this war is worth it for you to wake up, I really don't care what's your opinion. I do care about the Palestinians and what's going on in Gaza. We're not a theater for your anti-colonial feelings or whatever perspective you have. We're real people with real dreams, with their desire to live. And that's why we're fighting against the Israeli occupation and colonialism, because we want to live, not because we want to die in service of any cause. The supreme and primary goal of the Palestinians is life, not death.
There's another question from taking the questions in order, including the chat online. What is the situation for Palestinians after students have been arrested and detained?
I mean, I could be arrested today. I'm not a citizen. And if America deems it inappropriate for someone to criticize the killing of children in Gaza, and that's something I'll be arrested for, let them arrest me. I truly don't care. I think that this is a freedom of speech issue, obviously, and everyone should be entitled to that freedom of speech. But if this country becomes a place that you cannot criticize the killing of children, I don't think this country is worth living in. So I welcome their deportation.
Questions or comments?
Well, Khalil, thank you so much for being here. And I'm very sorry about the loss of your family members. And I also know that you are one person and there are thousands and thousands of Palestinians who suffer like you. But my question, I've heard it argued that this isn't a war. It's not a war between Hamas and IDF because Hamas is over. Yeah. There isn't much left.
True.
This is a genocide. And I think often with war, as Chris Hedges many years ago wrote how war is a force that gives us meaning and uses semantics.
Yeah.
And I think the world, not here, but in many parts, they conflate.
Yeah.
They say the pox on both of your houses, Hamas and IDF. Do you think Hamas is over? And how do we shift the discussion away from it's not a war, it's genocide?
So to start with, I did not use the term war at all, by the way, during my speech, not because of any because of conscious, I'm careful not to use the word war generally, right? But I use the word war to describe what's happened before, like the 6 other ceasefires, because that's what ceasefire presupposes, right? But like, there is really a misunderstanding usually that if you say the word war, it means always that there is no genocide. That's not true. Serbian war was a war, but there was a genocide there, right? The Rwanda genocide, you can think of the civil war that predated that, etc. So there is many cases I could think of empirically of genocide that came with a war. So there is no contradiction between both. Now on Hamas and its destruction, Hamas, in terms of actual military capabilities, are degraded to a very large extent. They don't really exist, right? But Hamas as a social movement is still alive and strong. Now, that's the issue. So even to say that we're going to kill the last member of Hamas as a social movement is genocidal, because many of these people are just people. They're part of a social movement that believe a certain thing, but they're not armed. They're not going to kill you or do whatever. So that's the danger. Hamas still maintains certain capacity when it comes to governance in Gaza and certain capacity when it comes to weapons, etc. But they're not excessive and they cannot threaten Israel in any ways. And if Israel was interested in only replacing Hamas, I think it would have happened in the 3rd month. Because literally in January 2024, they've degraded Hamas power enough. And all what they need to do right now to replace it with another government. But Benjamin Netanyahu does not want to replace it with another government. Why? Because he doesn't want to deal with a moderate Palestinian. He prefers Hamas because the world has a very negative perception of Hamas. And because Hamas are not the smartest. To be clear, they're not the smartest. And with all excuses for my friend on the Zoom, they're not. And that's why, I mean, you have to ask yourself, why Benjamin Netanyahu, the worst villain, says that Hamas is an asset? Why? Why the worst villain, who's Netanyahu, says that we want to fund Hamas, let's get funding to Hamas, because that's the best obstacle for a Palestinian state. So if you think that Hamas is a good thing for the Palestinians, you agree with one person from my point of view, and it's Benjamin Netanyahu and Israel, not the Palestinians. Although we have a segment of Palestinian society that support Hamas for a complicated reasons, but they're not the majority, never were the majority. And the only reason why they increase is because the occupation. In the 90s, despite the occupation, Hamas had 8% support. The more oppression by Israel happens, the more there are support for Hamas out of desperation, not out of belief in Hamas's approach, because unfortunately they're not, they haven't been any good to the Palestinians.
So Halil needs to leave shortly for another event. One more question?
One more question, and then there's someone in the back over there. Yeah.
Hey, I've been following you very well on social media. Appreciate your voice. Can I ask how are your conversations with politicians in DC and elsewhere around the country and the world, and like how do they respond to you, and do you see hope in things changing for the better politically?
No, excellent question. Conversation is always the same. It always centralizes Palestinian lives, how to save lives, how to get to a ceasefire. That's my priority right now. I made a pledge to myself and to my people in Gaza that I'm going to center their lives more than anything else, more than my political ideology or whatever that I believe in. And that's what I do with politicians. It all depends on what type of politicians I'm talking to. In DC, I talk to Congress sometimes, I talk to other staffers. I try to reach to whatever administration is there. Sometimes it's helpful, sometimes it's not. But I also work with embassies as well. And I sometimes we had some success with the British, with the French, with others, that they hear and they take our policy recommendations seriously on certain issues. The Americans are very, very hard when it comes to this issue, though. Our competition is with very powerful and well institutionalized, organizations that knows how to do the job much better than us because they've been here for tens of years.
So we're
thank you.
Wrap up, and
I'll be around.
Before we go, I wanted to remind folks how important individual contributions are when you have an organization that's not really eligible for funding from foundations. And so I'm going to give a check to Halil at the end here and invite others to come and take advantage of the matching donation offer. Checks, cash, whatever you have goes to a very important cause. So let's give a round of applause to Halil.